We're four friends with hot takes on food media.
And we're here to review and recap all kinds of food shows in bite-sized seasons.
Plus, virtual potlucks, cooking adventures, and food memes.
Welcome to Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes.
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Hey, it's Justine.
And it's me, Meg. Welcome back to Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes. This season we're covering Taste the Nation with Padma Lakshmi, Season 1. In Taste the Nation, award-winning cookbook author Padma Lakshmi goes on a journey across the United States, exploring the rich and diverse food cultures of various immigrant groups and seeking out the people who have shaped American food to what it is today. On the menu for today's episode, we have Season 1, Episode 3, Don't Mind If I Dosa, and Episode 4, The Gullah Way. But before we dive into Taste the Nation, let's find out what we've been cooking, eating, doing in the kitchen, getting up to culinary-wise. Justine, what about you?
So I went to the farmer's market last week and I bought a pumpkin. You may have seen on our social media, I bought this pumpkin for eating, not a decorating.
Decorative uses only.
I wanted to make something from East Mirasota's cookbook, and I made the pumpkin malai curry, and it's super good. I'm actually gonna go get like another 2 more pumpkins today because it made way more sauce than veg, so I still have like sauce in the fridge. Basically, you roast crescents of pumpkin, if you can imagine that.
Wait.
Then...
For our UK listeners, do we have to describe what a crescent is?
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, that's a throwback to a Great British Bake Off episode where none of the contestants seemed to know what a crescent was.
So on the stovetop, you make a sauce that's red onions, ginger, garlic, tomato puree, and some spices, cumin, cinnamon, chili powder, garam masala, a little bit of sugar, and coconut milk. And also, you finish it off with a little bit of lime juice. So it's very like that citrusy from both like the lime plus like acidic like tomato puree. And then the spices, it's very cinnamon forward. And then the coconut milk. So you have that and you just put it on top of rice, or you can have it with naan. And it's good. It's good. That's why I said I'm going to go get some more veg so I can make it again.
Yeah, it sounds great. It sounds very autumnal.
Yes, very much like, you know me, I was like ready for spooky season. Let's go.
Justine is making motions like she's, I don't know, a bat gonna pounce on something. I'm not quite sure.
I think it's meant
spoopy.
Ready for fall, but I'm... She's all in.
Watch out. So that's me. What have you been up to, Amanda?
Guys, we got a stove.
Hey! Burr, 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 burr.
It's not hooked up yet, but it arrived at the house 2 days ago. My husband also got an air fryer.
Oh.
Because there was some Costco special, and I came home one day, and he's like, look what I got! And he's like really excited about it. So far, to me, the best thing that he's made in it is I had some frozen burritos like for lunches at work, and he put them in the air fryer, and they were very crispy, but not like overly. It was very, very good. Oh, and then my best friend came over for a sleepover last week, and we had Indian food, which fits in with the theme today, from my favorite local Indian place, Ab.
What did you have?
I had a special chicken tikka masala, and it's one of the few dishes where like there's onions in it, and I will just straight up eat them because they just taste like the sauce and everything. It's so good. I also had some samosas and some naan because I was I'm trying to get Jeremy to like Indian food, and I gave him one of my samosas, and I had gotten a meat one because I thought he'd be a little more into trying that. And then he ate like half the naan because I got like a double order of naan so that he could. So I'm trying to, because I'm hoping to maybe get Priya's Indianish this Christmas or just buy it for myself finally. And I want to start making some things. So I'm trying to like slowly get Jeremy into, he's never really had Indian food and he just thinks, oh, it's all spicy, and he doesn't like super spicy food. And so I'm trying to be like, look, here are flavors that you like.
He likes bread. Good.
Yeah.
Good place to
taste
start.
it before, so this was a step in the right direction.
Have him try some pakoras, too.
Yes, I will probably have him try some pakoras. What about you, Meg? What have you been up to?
Well, now that you mention it, I also had Indian food last night. I had saag paneer and rumali roti, and it was delicious. But what I planned to talk about was another sandwich I made. I guess I'm on a sandwich kick. But I made...
Paging Molly Baz.
Oh, yeah. It must be all the Molly influence. This was a sandwich with grilling cheese, not grilled cheese, mind you. So I had recently discovered so-called grilling cheese, which is sometimes halloumi cheese, or sometimes it's just this generic grilling cheese. I've tried to find out more about what kind of cheese it is. It's very vague. The packaging didn't even give me much more information, but basically it's a cheese with a much higher melting point so that you can literally put it on a grill or grill it in a pan and it won't just melt out everywhere. So it kind of retains its shape, so you get these little cheese steaks essentially. So I grilled up some cheese. I put it on a fresh ciabatta with big slices of heirloom tomato, and taking a page out of Justine's playbook, I put pesto and a little bit of sour cream on top, and it was really good.
Hey,
Nice.
What kind of pesto?
Whatever Trader Joe's pesto is.
Gotcha.
I think it's pretty standard, pine nuts and all that.
And how was the result?
Oh, it was great. I highly recommend grilling cheese because it's one of those squeaky cheeses. You know how they like to use that term, I would say, especially at Bon Appetit, like, oh, this cheese is so squeaky. And I never really understood exactly what they meant until I had nice, squeaky, bouncy, chewy cheese. But it was very interesting. I liked it a lot. So
Nice. I've seen grilling cheese, but I don't know that I've ever bought it. So
it's good.
I'll have to bring that up to Jeremy, because I know we've seen
Give it a
when,
try.
when we've gone to Grandpa's Cheese Barn.
Grandpa's Cheese Barn.
You're so Midwest.
I know.
That sounds like it would be right at home on Taste the Nation.
Yeah.
Should we get into it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's
All right,
go.
our first episode that we're talking about today is Season 1, Episode 3, Don't Mind If I Dosa. The Hulu description is, Padma asks family, friends, and those she admires how they hold on to Indian culture and pass it to the next generation. In New York City, she cooks the dishes that remind her of her original home and tastes Indian foods near her current home.
I enjoyed this episode. The stuff where she was talking about her daughter and what she likes to eat, or what she's kind of doesn't want to, eat when she didn't like lentils and things like that. It reminded me of the interview that we talked about between Priya and her mom, and talking about the culture, and when Priya was kind of like in, middle school, high school, and be like, ugh, I don't want that Indian food, mom. And I just thought it was interesting because we, had seen an interview, or, listened to an interview before, and then seen that here as well, of the kids not wanting that. Well, and then Padma even talking about when she was in high school and wanted to be Angelique instead of Padma, which was so funny. I feel like that's such a teenage girl thing to do, though. Like, I knew several girls who were like, I want to go by this name now instead, or I'm going to spell my name differently. And then by like senior year, we're like, yeah, never mind, forget that I said that.
Yeah, like the description said, this one was really focusing on generational teachings. So we have Padma's reaction to her daughter's sense of being Indian American, her own sense of being Indian American. She talks about how her mother was one of her first teachers for cooking. And she also interviews Madhur Jaffrey, who is a famous actress, chef, cookbook writer, cooking show host, also Indian American. And she talks about how she learned to cook from her mother via letters she received when she moved to London. Padma also talks to a former U.S. attorney, Preet Bharara, about his kids and their tastes in Indian food. So yeah, a lot of this was interesting, seeing how certain traditions are passed down from the generations. And I thought it was interesting to hear Padma talk about how her daughter's choices really did emotionally affect her, how she felt a little bit gutted when her child was like, I hate lentils. Or even in the beginning of the show where you could tell that the daughter was like a little bit hesitant to admit that she liked American pancakes better than dosa, because I guess she knew that Padma was probably like, oh, I hope she likes dosa.
But she likes dosa better than waffles.
She does, yes.
I'd agree with that. This episode was very different from the other episodes. It didn't go like as deep into a lot of like historical references. It's interesting in the other episodes and the other one that we're going to talk about today, there's a part of like American tragedy to go along with each of them, that they're more like history lessons. And this one it wasn't, and it was just more like her personal front and searching. So yeah, not so much of like a sort of American story, but like more of her personal story.
Yeah. Out of the 4 episodes that we've watched so far, I would say this one is a little different, like you said. But I also feel like it still fits, if that makes sense. Like, you still get that idea of how she's talking to different people, and there's still some of the history, like talking about the Immigration Act that LBJ signed, and it's just not as in-depth, I think, as the other episodes.
This one felt different to me too, but I think it was definitely understandable because this is obviously the culture that Padma can speak to personally, where she can say, this is what my life has been growing up as an Indian American. So I would have also expected for an episode about Indian immigrants and Indian food to be different than the other episodes, because if she just sort of approached it from the same student perspective and learning from other people, I would have wondered, well, what does Padma have to say? Because this is definitely very personal to her.
Yeah, that's true. If she pretended like she didn't know what it was like to be an Indian immigrant, then it would be very disingenuous.
Yeah, and I think in terms of how the other episodes talk about assimilation, she sort of has that personal front with her own experiences and, like we mentioned, with her daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And the ever holding question of how do you hold on to your culture and celebrate that, but also, don't completely wipe everything else out, experience other cultures around you. And the whole arc thesis of the show, how do you be American? What does that mean to you personally and your cultures?
Yeah, they definitely emphasize in this episode that it's a personal journey, how you find the answer to that question.
Well, and I thought it was interesting when she was talking with Joffrey about, what do you think the mark, like, when will Indian food become more American? She told Padma it's going to be your generation and younger, and that it's going to be, it seemed essentially like more of a fusion. And it made me think again of Priya and Indian-ish, and the idea of like kind of fusing together traditional Indian cuisine and bringing in some of that Western style with it.
Yeah, and I mean, she didn't talk about like, Indian recipes, being whitewashed or anything, which we know that they are, and just like the claimings of like the quote unquote like Buddha bowl and all that sort of stuff, and white people like, oh, I've discovered turmeric, like that sort of. She didn't dive into that sort of aspect at all, but we know and are aware of it, as we've discussed in like other episodes and stuff.
Yeah. I think the closest she came to talking about it was the idea of like the de-seeding things, like when she reads in American recipes to de-seed something, and both she and Madra were like, oh, no, you don't. That's what's the point? Like, that's part of the flavor.
Yeah, speaking of that dish, do we have any thoughts on the food they showed in the episode? So they made lemony chicken with coriander. Was that recipe that Amanda was just describing? We also got a look at some of the burfi, some of the sweets, and also some street food. There was the street food vendor who was also making dosa, and it looked like he filled it with potato, was my guess. They didn't say exactly, but that's what it looked like. And Padma also made with her mother rasam, which is a tomato soup with tamarind.
Lots of dosa making in this episode, both at home and on the street and in restaurants. We've made dosa here. So yeah, we even have like the pan and like the spoon and stuff. It does require like a lot of special equipment.
You'd have to do some fermenting yourself.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't seem that hard. No.
Botulism.
And yeah, traditionally it is a sort of potato filling for the masala dosa. And they also ate parathas, stuffed parathas in this episode, which looked good as well. Lots of stuff. And then the gulab jamun looked good. Ravi attempted to make gulab jamun once and that completely failed. Disintegrated.
Was it just a big syrupy mess?
Yeah, that's a story. He was so upset. Like, he made like a first batch and completely disintegrated. He just threw the rest away because he's just like, I can't. It's
Oh, I've had those at restaurants. I've never tried to make that.
I can recommend a lot of stuff that I've made from Nisha Vora, her cookbook. She also has a lot of Instant Pot recipes, which are great and easy to make.
I think we might know what you're making for the potluck episode.
Maybe.
You got all the stuff you need to make dosa. It sounds like a good idea. As you know, a lot of Indian food is just by default vegan, so there's a lot of good options there.
I realized, I forgot to mention, like at the start of the episode when she went to the grocery store with her mom, it was Patel Brothers, and I didn't realize that was a chain because we have Patel Brothers in Columbus, and I was like, what? And then I ended up Googling, and it's like the largest Indian grocery store chain throughout the U.S., and I was like, oh, I had no idea. It's all over, guys. Even in New York.
Yeah, Ravi watched the episode with me.
So what did he think of this episode?
He thought it was a very basic episode. He said that it was for white people and that he didn't, learn anything new. He thought that the stuff about North and South India was very brushed over and it's a lot more complicated. And I'm like, yeah, it's a TV show.
It's 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it was meant to teach Indian American people anything.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Oh, do you know what burfi is? Well, yeah, of course I do.
Yeah, but I was just like, well, do you like the food they're making? He's like, oh, yeah, I've had that. My mom makes rasam. My mom makes this. I really liked the story when she sat down with her mom and her mom told her like this heartbreaking story about having to leave Padma and like go to America and start a life, and that Padma's mother's father looked after her. Her mom talking about her fear of failing, like as a mother, as a woman, like it was so sad. And she started to cry. That was a bit heartbreaking.
I loved the women that she talked to around the dinner table and talking about their experience of immigrating here as well. And the one woman who was like, and I kept my name. And they kept trying to get me to change my name to my husband's name. And I was like, nope, it's been good for 23 years. It's going to continue to be good for me. And I don't know. It was just really awesome to hear these women talk about sticking up for themselves and, looking for a better life. And even when it wasn't necessarily what their culture was teaching them and what they wanted to do, which is why they came to America partially.
Yeah, I think that the immigrant story for women is probably a lot different than for men, especially in a time of Padma's mother's generation, where she was saying it was very unusual to get divorced or to strike off on your own. And Joffrey was talking about how in India, she was defined by her relationship to men. So it was like, oh, she is so-and-so's daughter. She is so-and-so's sister. So I did definitely appreciate hearing that perspective of what it's like to be a woman, or what it was like to be a woman in India trying to make her way in America. I liked the U.S. attorney, or former U.S. attorney she interviewed, Preet Bharara. I also liked him because he's a podcaster, apparently. So, go podcasters. But he's also an activist, and he really didn't mince words in his interview, which I found refreshing and interesting. He said that it's immoral and stupid to denigrate immigrants. And I really liked what he was saying about how America was built on immigrants, and it became strong because of all the people that came to the country. And America wouldn't be what it is today if it weren't for immigrant groups. And that is obviously absolutely true. And he also commented on the phrase that some people like to sling, which is go back to where you came from. And he said, if everyone did that, there would be no one left in America. And it's just so true.
Except for Native Americans who would be very happy about that.
That is definitely true. All right, that's it for that episode. We're going to dosa on over to a quick commercial break. And then we will be right back with episode 4, The Gullah Way.
It hurts.
Welcome back. We are talking about Taste the Nation Season 1, Episode 4, The Gullah Way. This is the Hulu description. The Gullah Geechee people of South Carolina are fighting to preserve the traditions passed down from their ancestors, West Africans forced into slavery. Padma catches and cracks crabs with new friends and old, all working towards reclaiming their heritage.
This episode surprised me a lot.
When she said, like, surprising because this is a culture that is influenced, but you've never heard of them. And I was like, oh my God, it's true. I've heard Gullah, but in the kids' television show, Gullah Gullah Island. And I had no idea there was this whole culture within the U.S. that I had no idea about.
Same.
And you just look at it, you're like, why is, like, everything about this just been told to me that it was just strictly like Louisiana and that's it. Like, so many of the things. And I'm like, what? And then they're saying it's the whole coast of the U.S.
But I agree. It's so much has been like, well, it's Louisiana. Like, that's the only place gumbo is. That's where rice stuff and shrimp and crabs. And it's like, clearly not. Clearly not.
Yeah, they said that there's about 200,000 Gullah Geechee people along the coast, but the unofficial capital of the Gullah Nation is Charleston, South Carolina. So that's where most of this episode took place.
Sarah, who was saying, if there's anything in, like, textbooks for kids, it's maybe a paragraph. I mean, this is something that I've discussed because my youngest sister is 15 years younger than me, and the things that she learned about different cultures just across the world, like history, is so different from what I learned. Like, she actually learned actual, like, Indian history, which we never covered when I was taking history in, like, middle school or high school. And she's like, well, don't you know about blah, blah, blah? And I was like, no, that was not taught to me. We fully just covered, like, Western history for the most part.
Yeah. And like the same, like, every year.
Yes. And I was like, I can tell you so much about the Norman invasion, but no, I don't know any history about India unless I've read it in other things that I have sought out myself. And she was like, oh, but I think there's still more we can do, obviously. But it was just very interesting to see that here, that this is even American history culture, and it is not being taught at all, basically.
I don't know. I liked everything about this episode. I liked all the segments. She first meets up with Michael Twitty, who we do follow on Instagram. Like, he showed up. I was like, I know that guy.
Another James Beard award-winning author.
True. And also a Gullah descendant himself. And he says that he likes to preserve the history of his ancestors through food. I really liked this episode as well. It was very beautiful. I've never been to South Carolina. I have been to North Carolina, but not necessarily the sort of marshy parts. So I always found this region very beautiful with, like, the Spanish moss and the waterways. So I liked the cinematography of this episode. It was just very pleasing to look at. And of course, the food shots are always very, very nicely done. And not only did they show these beautiful places, but it wasn't for nothing. It was woven into the story they were telling about the Gullah Geechee Nation and how these beautiful gardens were once plantations and, you know, they were once forced to work there. And so there's this dichotomy everywhere you look of, wow, look at these beautiful surroundings, but sort of like at what cost, or how did this come to be? So it was interesting to see how there's history behind everything and everywhere Padma goes.
I loved how they've taken that, though, and turned it into the people who survived with what they had. And everything they have is in their garden, and that's what they use, and what's on their farm. And the whole Padma turning around and be like, it's farm to table before farm to table.
Yeah, but it's true. Like, it honestly is true. It's just now, of course, that's been taken over by white people to be trendy.
Something we've noticed in a lot of episodes is similarities between some ingredients for some cultures. And I liked the emphasis on rice in this episode. They were explaining how integral it was to the Gullah Geechee history, and that they transformed these sort of swamplands into rice paddies, and so much of their food culture is based on rice. And one of the interviewees said, oh yeah, you could eat rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I feel like rice is maybe not universal, but kind of close to universal. There are so many cultures based around rice as a staple of the diet. So I like seeing the different applications in all these episodes.
Yeah, I mean, out of the 4 that we've watched so far, 3 of them have already featured cuisines that use a lot of rice.
Yeah.
For sure.
Sorry, Germany. No rice for you. And all the different ways to make the rice, too. Like, that red rice dish looked so good. Oh my gosh, that looked amazing. But then, like you said, the person who said that it could be breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then they were talking about it could just be as plain as white rice with butter. But then there's all of these places in between and different ways to use the rice, and how that ended up being, even towards the end of the episode, the rice dish with the crab, too. And, like, it was like rice was almost in every single dish featured in the episode, but in different ways as well.
It made me want to dive back into this cookbook that I have, Afro Vegan by Brian Terry. I've made the red rice out of there a couple times. It's great. I've always been afraid to make okra because I basically have maybe had it once and I'm a little scared.
I love okra.
I've been trying a bunch of new vegetables this year, but like, yeah, that one's particular. I've been afraid to.
There's a lot of
try.
okra in Indian food too, like Padma was
I know.
saying.
Yeah.
It's so good. You need to combine your okra with Amanda's air fryer. Make some nice fried okra. Be wonderful.
Go.
Well, that's, I think, the only kind of okra I've had, and it's been a long time ago, because we used to travel south almost every other year for like summer vacation when I was a kid, and my dad would always have us get fried okra at places. So it's been, I would say, maybe 20 years since I've had okra. So yeah, I clearly need to try that as well. I have also been intimidated about making it because I feel like because they were talking about, like, you don't want it to be just mushy and stuff. And I get like that instantly.
And it can turn slimy. Yeah.
Yes. And so even hearing Padma go like, oh, this is perfect. I'm like, great. Ooh, yeah, I want to try that. But then internally, I'm also like, I don't want to make it myself. Like, that's terrifying.
I kind of like the sliminess a little bit, to be honest. They were saying here that they used okra to thicken the gumbo instead of a roux. And I thought that was really interesting because, yeah, okra can have that sort of viscosity, I guess is the word I'm looking for. So I think it was interesting that they're like using that instead of roux. I bet it tastes really good.
I'm still like sort of like wowed by this whole episode. Like Amanda said, it's this culture that we didn't even know existed, except we know everything about it almost, you know?
Yeah.
Because everything has been sort of like assimilated outwards from like the music, the language, the cooking techniques.
To the music was so fascinating. I just thought when he was talking about like the way that they would crush up the rice and the beat to that, and then the influence of that into jazz and hip hop, and it's so true. And just like, this is an episode I could have watched like 3 parts of. Like, I would have loved to get even more in depth.
I really liked learning about this as well. And it did bring up a lot of, I guess, questions I had because, as you were saying, we seem to know a lot about this culture just sort of by osmosis without realizing the roots that it came from, the actual like origins of this culture. And what I then wondered was, well, are there other subcultures branched off of other enslaved peoples that were brought here before? Like, surely this is only one group of people among a larger group. So then I wondered, well, what are perhaps some other pockets of culture from a similar background in that region that I don't know about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. I can imagine there's lots. And, like, we never give Black people the credit they deserve. And, you know, it's just been in the conversation over the past year, that statement. It's insanity, you know?
One of the things that I found interesting was the discussion of the language as well, and how there is a Gullah language that exists, but that have been basically quashed out because people said, and clearly white people said, like, oh, that sounds unintelligent or whatever. But, like, no, that is a truly unique language, and not wanting to lose that, I just found that part really interesting as well. And again, like Meg said, how many other languages like that in other cultures have just been quashed out because, or like nearly extinct because of sort of the mono culture that white Americans try to create.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always find linguistic stuff really interesting. I also had notes in here about how global warming ruins the party again.
Yeah, there we go.
So
there's the politics.
Well, as you were saying, a lot of the show is more political than we anticipated it would be based on the commercials. But yeah, global warming rears its head in here. Maybe it will in other episodes as well. But they talk about how the warmer waterways are killing the fish and in turn killing the crab business. Their yield is a lot smaller than it used to be even just a few years ago, and there's rising sea levels and all of these things that endanger the land, endanger the way of life for a lot of people.
Well, and what's also interesting is we say there's the, you know, there it is being political, but also at the same time, like, climate change shouldn't be political.
Yes.
It's just a scientific fact of something that is going on in our world. And just the idea of mentioning that, like, that is a fact of what is happening in that region, and, you know, not just affecting the Gullah culture, like, that's affecting everybody in that region. And I know particularly further south in Florida, like, I went to school with a guy who's an environmental scientist who's constantly trying to fight climate change in Florida and flooding and everything. Like, that is just a fact of what's going on, but it is perceived as political because of our current political climate. But it's
yeah, I more use the word political in sort of the in the sense that people use it a lot, but not necessarily in the way that it should be.
It just like hit, because I thought the same thing. I was like, oh, there we go. And I'm like, but this is just a fact of what these people are dealing with and what is happening to the fish and the crabs, and then therefore their livelihoods, and then therefore the culture in general of what's, you know, happening. It's like it's all connected, and it all affects every person.
It really does.
Okay, if I wasn't vegan, I would 100% try that crab rice. Because, I don't know, seafood is definitely one of my weaknesses as having grown up in New England. So whenever I see something seafood, it's not like meat or cheese for other people, it's seafood for me, where I'm like, oh.
The crab looked wonderful. I would eat all the crab stuff that they made in this episode, definitely, if I weren't vegetarian.
I am not vegetarian, but seafood and I don't get along very well.
Oh, boo.
But the few things of seafood I will eat, occasionally some shrimp and occasionally some crab. So, but I thought it was interesting to see Padma actually, like, go out on a crabbing boat and help bring in the crabs and everything. And then when she was cooking later on with her friend and, like, trying to, like, put the crabs at him to scare him, it was just an interesting, like,
She's
little
cute.
Yeah, it was cute. And you could tell in this, Padma was really getting affected by all of the humidity. Her hair was, like, constantly, like, waving out, and then at, like, one point she was, like, dabbing herself with a cloth, and I just thought, oh, it
yeah,
must
you could practically feel the humidity. It looked very sweaty out there.
Yes.
I love the, I want to be like, I love the diet of this region. It's very vegetable forward, leafy greens, whole grains, and seafood. I mean, like, that's pretty much perfection as I see it, you know?
Time to eat more okra.
I like the highlighting of showing the kids the farming and the cooking too, of, like, again, we've brought this up in, some of the previous episodes, but like the generational part and passing on that culture.
That girl, one little girl who's so short she couldn't even see into the mixer to see what she was mixing. Yeah, I really liked the episode. I'm going to dive more into some recipes that I have that are, they're West African based, not necessarily this region based, but...
Yeah, well, they talked about how the Gullah people came from West Africa. The only criticism I've had of this entire episode is there were like 3 close-ups on her driving a BMW, and I was like, I wonder who sponsored this episode.
Big BMW commercial.
Oh man, I'm so glad I didn't notice that, because it definitely would have annoyed me. I mean, pay attention to like every Marvel movie. Whenever there's a car in the scene, it'll drive from the foreground or from the background into the foreground right in front of the camera, pausing very conveniently on that badge on the front of the car.
Yeah. No, it's such a tiny like thing. Like, they got to make their money so that they can keep making this show, which I think is great. So like, do what you got to do. It's just, I was like, oh, did you really have to put the close up on the steering wheel badge?
One plug that I will get behind on the show is that they always start the show talking about the James Beard Foundation, and they direct people to jamesbeard.org/open4good. So that's the commercial we were talking about in our first episode that encourages people to eat locally, support small restaurants, help people with food insecurities, that type of thing. And I think we'll link to that in our show notes going forward. All right, that's going to do it for Taste the Nation this week. Time to move on to the back burner. On today's back burner, we're going back to Jabibo. We're heading back to the tent.
You can't keep us away.
We can't stay away. So the winner of last year's Great British Bake Off was Peter Sawkins, the youngest winner of Jabibo. And he announced that his cookbook is now available for pre-order. It's called Peter Bakes, and it will be published in the UK in October 2021. I'm not sure when or if it'll be available in the US, but keep an eye out for it, UK listeners.
I wonder why this cookbook looks so familiar.
Its title sounds familiar as well.
If you win Jabibo, you have to have a cookbook called Your Name Bakes. It's in the contract.
Apparently.
It looks great. He's cute. He did a little unboxing thing of him first time seeing his book. He's adorable.
He is adorable. And the publisher mentions that the recipes are easy to follow. I'm not sure. His stuff always looked so complicated, but, maybe he made some easier recipes for the cookbook. And there's also a lot of gluten-free options, kind of like how his bakes were in the show itself.
I wonder how many are Christmas themed.
All of them.
Probably half, at least.
Is there a
He could come out
tree?
with a Christmas cookbook like Kim Joy did.
Yeah.
And we also thought we'd talk just a little bit about this new season of the Great British Bake Off, Jabibo 2021. At time of recording, there have been 2 episodes released so far. So Cake Week and Biscuit Week.
I've watched Cake Week and the start of Biscuit Week, but I wasn't able to finish Biscuit Week yet.
It's good.
Yeah, I've watched both. I'm really enjoying it so far. I think it's a fun season. There's a lot of fun contestants. I think that Giuseppe's going to win, although I don't know. Maybe. That's my prediction.
Jurgen giving him a run for his money.
Yeah,
Those two are the highest so
yeah,
far.
Jurgen and Giuseppe seem neck and neck so far.
Every time Jurgen talks, it just makes me really happy because he's such a little German nerd. It's like, I don't know. There's just something. He just seems like such a dad in like the best way. Yeah. I mean, Giuseppe, clearly he is also a dad. Like, but yeah, I enjoy both of them. There is a person named Amanda on there. I have mixed feelings about her baking.
One of the contestants, I think it's Lizzie. Her accent, I'm having so much trouble. I don't know if I'm just an American, but I'm like, I don't understand.
I think she with said subtitles on always.
I think she said she was from Liverpool. I'm not 100% sure about that.
I think you're right. I also I just watch everything with subtitles on because I have not the best hearing, so.
But she's hilarious. I loved her story about the runaway emu or ostrich, whatever it was.
Oh my God, yes.
She's a very funny baker.
She's gonna get cut sometime soon.
The only thing I have not liked so far was the achy breaky heart opening, just because I am not a Billy Ray.
Because it was terrible.
Too many mullets, guys. Too many mullets.
But Noel pulled it off. Noel looks sexy.
Noel always looks good.
No,
I am
yeah.
the joke.
You can put Noel in
anything
anything. Yeah.
I did like that he and Lizzie had essentially like mix and match outfits in the first episode. Like they were the reverse of each other.
That was hilarious. I do want to quote a tweet from Allison Herman, who is a writer for The Ringer, but she said of that achy breaky heart opening, she said, "The Bake Off cold open is uniquely triggering because it shows what the rest of the world thinks American culture is, and we mostly deserve it."
Yeah. It's true. And upsetting.
All right, as always, we want to thank everyone who has interacted with us online. I want to give a huge thanks to Raven for bringing it to our attention that not all of our episodes were showing up on Spotify. Really appreciate you telling us about that because, of course, we want all of our listeners to be able to easily access our podcast. It's all fixed now. Thank you so much, Raven, for helping us troubleshoot. On Twitter, Angela P. said, "Recipes should include photos of the mess you have to clean up after cooking." And I definitely agree.
Yes.
I just saw that last night, and I saw your response with the picture from the Brownimals.
Oh, yes, the carnage after I decorated some brownies for our Jabibo potluck episode. We've had a lot of interaction with people on Instagram. Thank you to Kat, Blake, Mary, Justisabelthingspodcast, Kitchen Tweezers, and the Unwritable Rant, who revealed that they are a culinary school dropout. I found that very interesting. I'm sure there's some stories there that we'd like to hear about. Global Bakes by Tanya on Instagram also said that she loves Taste the Nation, and she binged it when it first came out. And finally, we got a lot of nice comments and interaction on my photo of the knefe that I enjoyed, which is a phyllo pastry dessert filled with savory sweet cheese and drenched in rosewater syrup. It was delicious. It was just as good as it looks. So thank you to Appetrip, My Worst Date podcast, Katie from the Femtastic Podcast, the Edmonton Tourist, Ashley Simone, aka The Table Envy, Lemon's Test Kitchen, Fooddemia, and also thank you to Diana from Happily Ever Aftermath, who enjoyed the knefe with me and also suggested we go have it because she'd had it before and highly recommended it. So it was a great recommendation.
Aw, I'm jealous you got to spend real life time with Diana.
I know, face-to-face time with our podcast pals.
Jealous.
We always like to share new reviews on the podcast. So if you've been listening to and enjoying Pod Appétit, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and we will read it right here. Also, check out our awesome new merch at podappetit.threadless.com. And tune in for our next episode. We are going to continue our coverage of Taste the Nation Season 1. Next up is Episode 5, What is Chop Suey Anyway? And Episode 6, Where the Kebab is Hot.
It's a really good song.
Oh, Chop Suey.
I'm just answering the question.
Thanks for listening to Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes.
We'd love to hear from you, so find us on Twitter and Instagram at pod_appétit.
And on Facebook at Pod Appétit Podcast.
You can also email us at podappetitpodcast@gmail.com and find all of our episodes on our website, podappetitpodcast.com.
Ladybirds, ladybugs, lady beetles, cotyledonee, whatever you want to call them, are a popular group of insects. That is, unless you're an aphid. My name is Rachel, and on every episode of my podcast, Hidden Wings and Bloodlust, I take you on a journey through the world of ladybirds, covering little-known species, dietary habits, music featuring ladybirds, and even ladybird-related crime. Subscribe to my show whenever you get your podcasts.